Hey, welcome everyone to the Chelmsford Senior Center for this special town meeting that will be considering one and only one article this evening. I'm Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford TeleMedia, so stand by for an evening full of more real estate jargon than you ever thought you could handle. Get used to the acronyms LAA and ADU. An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, affordable, that is now state law signed by Governor Moore Healey last August, and it becomes effective on February 2nd. This is a law that allows by right anybody with a single or two-family home to be able to put basically an apartment or another living unit in their basement, in a building in the backyard, up to 900 square feet. Now, our town bylaws already have something like that called a limited accessory apartment, but it is much more restrictive than what this new mandated law, statewide law, allows. And so what we're doing tonight is to try to bring into closer conformance what the town allows, because if we don't pass something tonight, then essentially what the state has decreed will become the law for Chelmsford, and that is much more restrictive than what we're proposing here tonight. So the idea is to propose an amendment to our own zoning bylaws that is a little bit more restrictive than what the state would allow. Now, there is actually some money involved in this. The governor, in addition to signing this into law, provided a lot of money to jumpstart the process. I don't think that's in play tonight. And one of the other things you'll hear is that the state itself has finalized its own regulations. So what you see tonight will be just a work in progress.
The flag is behind us over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Right now we're going to test your voting devices to do a quorum count. And while you're doing that, I'd like to state for the record that I have checked the return of service on the notice of this special warrant article session, and it complies with the law. Okay, I'd like everybody to test it, but we have enough for a quorum. While we do that, is there anyone here who has not heard my normal colloquy before a town meeting session? Good. Nobody. Everyone has. So I'm gonna forego that. But I would like to mention a couple of things. I'd like to thank Mr. Latina, who pointed out an area where I had not been on top of a procedure that I should have been, and it gave me an opportunity to review all of the moderator's procedures, which were really sort of out of date. And there were the major changes, and you don't have them in front of you, but I'll let you know what they are, is under the old rules, you were only able to ask 2 questions per warrant article, which I felt that was unfair, but I didn't enforce it. But I've amended it so that you can ask 4. And I think that if you choose your questions wisely, 4 is plenty. The other thing is that nobody can hold a place in the line for anybody else. If you're standing in line, you're standing in line for yourself. You're not going to be saying, oh, I'm holding it for so-and-so who is somewhere else, whatever. Okay? That having been said, I will declare that we do have a quorum, and I do have to always announce that the fire exits are on both sides of the room here and in the front where you entered. And if you have to leave the meeting early, which hopefully nobody will because it's only one article, please drop your electronic voting devices with the checkers of the front hall. At this time, I will entertain the presenter of the one and only article that we're going to be addressing this evening. And that would be Mr. LaValle from the Planning Board.
Mr. Moderator, tonight's presentation has been slightly adjusted from the published version in the FinCom booklet. Two amendments are being proposed as a result of last-minute changes necessitated by the state regulations that were released on late Thursday. The FinCom booklet is essentially outdated, but the handouts tonight do have the updated slides and our updated proposed bylaw. Most of the presentation tonight will focus on the bulk of the article, but in the last few slides I will address the proposed amendments, including the reasoning for those amendments. So, Article 1 is the only article tonight, and this is the main slides are the text of the article, so I'm going to skip through those to my presentation, since you do have those in your handouts. So the article tonight is to amend the town code with two changes. One is to delete the existing section, and then to add the text that we are proposing. So in August of 2024, the state signed into law the Massachusetts ADU law. It takes effect February 2nd, which unfortunately necessitated this special town meeting. The state law will apply to all municipalities, including municipalities without ADU zoning or with ADU zoning that's contradictory to their state law. So our current limited accessory apartment bylaw will essentially be ineffective as of that date if we do not take action tonight. So the state has stated goals for their new law. It's to facilitate housing stock growth between 8 to 10,000 of new ADUs in 5 years, and to prohibit what they consider overly restrictive regulations on ADUs. For example, owner occupancy requirements. The key for the new law is that these are protected use ADUs that must be allowed by right in any zones where single-family dwellings are allowed. And the theory behind this is, again, to increase housing stock. So some highlights of the Massachusetts ADU law. It added the definition of the ADU to the Dover Amendment protected uses, which essentially limits special permit discretion of towns and municipalities. It allows by right any detached or attached ADUs in zoning districts where single-family dwellings are allowed, which in our case includes all residential districts. They can be accessory to any single-family or multifamily dwellings, and it limits the restrictions in the process to only those that we normally place on single-family dwellings and other accessory buildings. We cannot create limits on owner occupancy, age restriction, or affordability, and we have limited parking restriction ability. We cannot require more than one on-street or off-street parking space, and for any ADUs that are within a half a mile of a transit station, no off-street parking may be required. In Chelmsford, the MBTA, or the LRTA, allows flagging along their routes. So just over half of Chelmsford is essentially within that half mile of LRTA route. So our planning board strategy and approach. The key objectives is to ensure that our bylaw is compliant and enforceable, and it's also to provide clear standards and process for both residents and town staff. The state regulations, as of the writing of these slides, were still being drafted, so it is essentially still a moving target as of the drafting of these slides, which ended on Thursday with the final drafts being finalized. So our goals for this were to have the bylaw initially comply with state law, and then after the regulations are final and after some time for our new bylaws to take effect, the town, if the town desires in the future, can reassess with a larger committee across town to analyze and propose changes to the bylaw if we want. So the key provisions of the proposed bylaw. Only protected ADUs as defined by the state will be allowed. The state does allow a second ADU if the town allows it, but we are not. The maximum size of the ADUs are 900 square feet gross floor area, or 50% of the principal dwelling, whichever one is smaller. We are requiring one off-street parking space, but of course, if it's within the half mile, we cannot require that parking space. We are prohibiting short-term rentals, which are considered by the state as less than 31 days. We're not allowing new curb cuts for ADUs. They must use existing driveway and walkways to branch off of. We're applying the same design standards as prior bylaws had for entryways and the stairs for attached ADUs. For detached ADUs, they cannot be located within the front yard area, and the original bylaw that we are proposing did have the limit of the height, but we are removing that as part of the amendment. For the review and approval process, ADUs on single and two-family dwellings have a plan review by the building commissioner. ADUs on multifamily, which is 3 or more units, will have a minor site plan review by the planning board. All setbacks and other dimensional requirements will still apply using our standard table of dimensional requirements. And it mirrors our current process for zoning relief for any pre-existing non-conforming situations. The difference is that no special permits or variances may be required. So although it'll still go before the board, for determination, it doesn't require a specific variance, and it will only require a simple majority. If non-conforming, the ADU must not be substantially more detrimental than the existing non-conforming structure to the neighborhood. So quite a few people have brought up other concerns like sewer, so I wanted to address that today. With current regulations from the DPW, they'll remain mostly unchanged, but it's our understanding that they will be revised to allow ADU connections to sewer. And that's essentially because current regulations allow an increase of the residential property up to 500 gallons per day. And based on Title V calculations, sewer increases for ADUs would be under that 500 gallons per day. The actual connection and how it's connected to sewer and that design will be determined based on best design practices. So that will not be part of the zoning. So as a quick comparison of how the new bylaw compares to our current LAA bylaw. So the state mandated ADUs are detached and attached, whereas we are only allowing attached at the moment. The size has increased to 900 square feet from 750. And our current bylaws require that it must be occupied by a relative and that the principal dwelling is owner occupied. The state no longer allows us to put those restrictions on the ADUs, so there's no restriction on the occupancy and no restriction on the ownership of either the ADU or the principal dwelling. So what happens if we don't pass this? Well, components of our limited accessory apartment bylaw that conflict with the state law are essentially no longer enforceable, and state law supersedes the local bylaw. For areas that we do not address in our current bylaw, the state law becomes our effective bylaw, and the state law is much more permissive in those areas than our local bylaw. So our goal is to ensure that our bylaw is compliant and enforceable. So this was part of the original presentation, which is no longer necessary. So now that the draft guidelines are different, I wanted to explain a little bit of how we're going to handle that. So this past Thursday, notifications were passed out that the draft guidelines have been adjusted and essentially finalized. There were small changes that were suggested by Town Council to bring our current proposal into compliance. And those two amendments that we're handling tonight are how we're proposing to make those changes. Now, unfortunately, because this happened on Thursday, none of the boards, including the Planning Board, have had an opportunity to review these changes or discuss them. So we'll essentially be doing that in real time tonight. So I just wanted to clarify something from the state on what is considered an unreasonable restriction. So they give some text here that you can read in the slides, but essentially there are three major restrictions that are no longer reasonable. The occupancy, the limited accessory dwelling unit is no longer enforceable, and so we have to adjust. The dimensional standards are also potentially unreasonable in some areas, so we had to adjust for that as well. So the proposed amendments tonight are going to be in two different amendments. The first one is going to remove two definitions, the gross floor area and the principal dwelling. We're going to add text that refers to the state law for those definitions, because they have changed slightly from our proposed bylaw. And we'll essentially refer back to the state definition for those definitions. The second amendment is the first bullet on the slide, and we're proposing to remove the height restriction for detached ADUs because they have said that that is an unreasonable restriction. And essentially, logically, it'll be restricted by the square footage. So that is the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer some questions.
I understand that none of the boards have had an opportunity to discuss this. I will give the chairs of all the three boards, the Finance Committee, the Select Board, and the Planning Board, an opportunity, if they so desire, to either poll their board now or give an explanation. So we'll start with the Finance Committee.
Thank you. As stated, the Finance Committee has not had the opportunity to review and discuss or provide a recommendation on the amended article. However, I will say that the previous article is presented to us prior to these two amendments presented this evening was recommended unanimously by the Finance Committee.
Does the Select Board?
The Select Board met earlier this evening and voted to indicate support of the proposed article in spirit, but took no action on official action on the article, knowing that these amendments were upcoming.
And the Planning Board?
The Planning Board voted unanimously to support this article. As stated previously, we have not had an opportunity to discuss the two amendments, which seem consistent with the spirit of the previous article in terms of bringing us into compliance with the state law. If it would please the, what's your title, John? Moderator, sorry. We could take a quick poll right now.
If you wish.
On the
I mean,
amendments.
it's up to you.
I think it makes sense for us, since it's our article, to poll the board as to our support for the amendments. Chris?
I support them.
Joel? Mike Raisbeck? Mike Walsh? I don't see Mike Walsh. Anita? And I support the article. Oh, and John. Okay, so, and Marcy? So of
Okay.
those,
Thank you. Okay. Has the specific language of the First Amendment been on the screen anywhere? Is that available? Okay. I am encouraging all the town meeting reps to read the highlighted amendment referring to subsection B of 195-6.1, and then also the language
point of order, Mr. Moderator.
yes.
Just by way of clarification, these amendments have been reviewed by town council to be consistent with bringing...
It would not be before you if it had not.
Right. But, I mean, in supporting our general objectives of bringing the...
Oh, I do appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, I'd like us to consider it as a friendly amendment, and then we don't have to take votes on it. But I want you all to know what you're voting on. So the second amendment, have you done all of them?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, that's, and then there's one also for subsection D2. Okay, I think that's all of them, right? Okay, now's the time for questions or debate. Again, your debate is limited to 3 minutes per person. You're limited to 4 questions per person. And the questions don't count against your 3 minutes towards debate.
Okay. Tom Amaro, Precinct 5. I'd like to ask a question. Does the specialized stretch energy building code apply to ADUs? Meaning they should be wired for EV ready and not have any gas hookups unless they make up for it with solar.
Yes, I believe any town restrictions or any town requirements and codes are still applicable to ADUs, including sewer, water, and energy.
Okay, I just asked because I didn't see any mention of it. Now, I thought I read the updated state's version and that it dropped the thing about flag stops being considered, a transit location. So is that correct?
I believe it.
That's being addressed to you.
I mean, if so, then we'd only be concerned with an actual physical half mile from a bus stop or train station.
It did? Okay. It did drop that, so that
Okay.
was something I missed in the weekend of work on this.
Oh, yeah, I was just reading it today.
My apologies.
I'm a little confused. On the 900 square feet, there was an or 50% the size of the primary dwelling unit. So if you have a dwelling unit that's 5,000 square feet, does that mean the ADU can be 2.5, or is 900 is the limit?
It's whichever's smaller. So
is
it's
smaller,
50%
okay.
or 900, depending on which
Oh,
one's
I'm sorry,
smaller.
okay. And why the restriction it can't be in the front yard?
So the planning board discussed this in our public hearing. Excuse me. And one of the situations that we talked about is for sheds and other accessory buildings, we already have a restriction that you can't put it in the front of the house. So essentially, you wouldn't want a house that's set way back to have another house right in front of it, essentially taking over the primary residence. So that, from an aesthetic perspective, the planning board felt that that was an odd placement for an accessory building similar to what we have in place now.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Peter Schultz, Precinct 8, and it's just a general question, Chris. Can you talk a little bit about the wording, the requirement wording, the shall versus the may and the will, and why that language is generally used? Because my understanding is shall is a hard requirement, may, other softer words are open to interpretation, and how were those trade-offs made?
So in drafting this, we essentially followed what the state is allowing. And for restrictions that we wanted to have in place, we use the shall not because we don't want it to be in place. For restrictions that, or for guidance, we have a may. And so that's the general guideline.
Could you comment on how the planning board deals with may?
So I don't think we have that in too many places in this bylaw. But in cases where there's a may, it's at the discretion of the builder or the homeowner to do it if they want to, or they don't have to. So it's an option for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris Bowman, Precinct 10. Mr. Moderator, are these just questions on the motion, the amended motion before us right now, or on the whole article?
Well, because it was a friendly amendments, the amendments have been incorporated in the whole motion.
Okay. I have questions on the whole thing, but if this is just segregated to this amendment, then I'll hold my questions.
Well, no, this is what you're going to be voting on. So if you have any questions, you can use your 4 questions now.
Okay. To amend the motion, correct?
No, no, no. It was a friendly amendment, so it does not require a vote.
Okay. So then I have 4 questions on the entire thing. Okay?
And by the way, I'm not using the, is it a friendly amendment or not? That's not one of your questions, okay?
Thank you very much. Okay, for each select board member, what are the specific benefits and detriments of this zoning change that allows absentee landlords to rent accessory dwelling units and principal homes in single-family neighborhoods and districts by right, meaning there's no requirement for special permit? So I would like to hear from each of the select board members.
I'm not sure that they're qualified to give a legal interpretation. They've made it clear, and I'm from what I've heard, and certainly the chair can correct me if I misheard, they are only approving the spirit of the fact that they want this change to comply with the regulations that have been recently promulgated by the state so that we are in compliance.
I understand that. However, as elected officials, they also have a responsibility to the residents of this town to evaluate it beyond what the state wants and determine what are the benefits to the residents of this town and what are the detriments.
No, I don't think that's an appropriate question because, to be honest with you, if you want to ask the general question, what happens if we don't pass this and what happens if we do pass this, I think that's an appropriate question. And I thought that Mr. LaValle had addressed that.
No, he didn't, and I'm not asking Mr. LaValle. I am asking the select board, who are the chief executive officers of this town and have a distinct and fiduciary duty to the residents of this town to look beyond what the state wants.
No, I don't think they have the right to.
Of course they do.
No, I don't. Then you're asking them to break the law, and I'm not going to ask them to engage in supposition of, well, we can do this, which exceeds what the law allows us to do.
Mr. Moderator, you are misinterpreting my question.
I don't
And
think I am.
again, I am not asking them to break the law. I am asking them for their personal evaluation of how this is going to affect the people of this town. What are the benefits and what are the detriments?
I think that was clearly addressed in Mr. LaValle's presentation, and if you weren't paying attention to it, I'm sorry, but we're not going to spend an hour disagreeing with you on your question.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, I respectfully disagree with your interpretation.
I understand.
And I will move on. Okay?
Go for it.
All right. So I guess that goes to my second question, which you will interpret the same way, which was, what is your individual motivation to implement what the state wants instead of protecting the single-family homeowners, present and future, who bought their homes in good faith in single-family neighborhoods and districts for the specific qualities of these neighborhoods and districts for them and their children. In a 2021 SJC case, pretty much the SJC said that residential inherently implies stability and permanence.
Once again, if in fact... No, now listen, please. If in fact the Attorney General has to go to court on whether or not these regulations violate any laws, then that absolves us, if the courts determine that it does, it absolves us from adhering to what we're doing today. On the other hand, if we don't adhere to the law, and certainly their personal opinions have nothing to do with whether or not we're in compliance with the law or not. If you want to ask them, do you want us to be in compliance with the law and that's why you're supporting that, I don't have a problem with that. If you're asking about the fact that when I bought my house in 1991, I did not expect my neighbor to have the ability to put an ADU next to it because the state has changed the law, I don't think that's a fair question.
Mr. Moderator? Mr. Moderator, I might be able to provide some additional clarification that may help answer some of that.
I appreciate it.
Okay. So the situation for the ADU law is very different than the MBTA law that we voted on earlier this year. With that situation, if we didn't do anything, nothing would happen. The state has changed their approach for this law, and if we don't do anything, the state law becomes our de facto bylaw. And the state law, the way it's been written, is extremely permissive and will allow a lot of the things that we have not allowed in our bylaw. So if we don't pass this and we don't do anything, the state law is essentially the de facto ADU bylaw for the town, and it will allow a lot more than what we're allowing.
I understand that, but thank you for your time and effort. I appreciate it. I have two more questions. I'm not sure if Mr. LaValle or FinCom would be the proper people to address this to. So I'll just ask it and then see who has any knowledge about it. So the question is, since this zoning change on ADUs is a fundamental change from benefiting the single-family homeowner, family members, and extended family, that now benefits absentee landlords, pretty much developers and investors, has the state applied the Administrative Procedures Act to this particular law, and/or the guidelines that just changed and redlined, the 760 CMR 71, on protected use of ADUs?
Okay, town council will respond to that. Well, you have a microphone right there.
In response to your question, ma'am, yes, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities that has promulgated the regulations that will be finalized and become effective on February 2nd, those were promulgated pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying February 7th, the state
Second.
will report its findings on applying the AP.
No, ma'am. On February 2nd, the regulations will go into
No,
effect.
I get that part, but this is on the, applying the APA to the guidelines and regulations for this fundamental change.
So the Administrative Procedures Act only applies to the regulations, and EOHLC has already followed those procedures.
Okay, the point of this question is because on January 8th, the SJC said the state failed
The
to
Milton
apply
decision, yes.
the APA to the guidelines for the MBTA zoning, and therefore they were unenforceable and unlawful. So this still follows.
And again, I don't want to cut you short, but you keep asking the same question a different way. As I have said to you, if in fact the courts decide that the legal advice and the determination that these regulations in any manner violate the law, that will negate what we're doing today. I don't want to, I think that most people got what I said the first time.
Okay, these are not.
Are you arguing now?
It doesn't matter, Mr. Moderator.
Are you arguing now?
I know, no, I'm not arguing with you. I am just saying that there's a specific purpose for each question.
I know, now, look, Ms. Bowman, please,
I will stop
please.
the questions.
Please, you asked a question. Town council indicated to you that the state has followed all of the procedures that they are legally required to follow in order for them to promulgate these regulations. So all your questions are doubting the legitimacy of the process. And what I'm saying to you is, this is not a proper place to litigate that. The proper place to litigate it is in the courts.
I understand what you're saying. I respectfully disagree.
That's fine.
Yep.
I've been wrong before.
No, it's fine. So if you would please start the clock. Okay. The reason why the APA is important is because non-compliance with the APA has specific requirements, including fiscal impact of the private and public sectors, and renders the state regulations and guidelines ineffective and unenforceable because they are unlawful, according to the SJC January 8th decision on the MBTA zoning guidelines. So the point is they have revised 760 CMR 71, which means they should automatically be applying the APA because, as with the MBTA zoning, we have zero fiscal impact that their guidelines or regulations would impose, and specifically what the fiscal impact would be upon this town. So the regulations for the protected use of accessory dwelling units, again, 760 CMR 1, were redlined and finalized on the 17th of January. So as town council just said, they haven't applied the APA as yet. The proposed state ADU bylaw is a fundamental change.
Excuse me. I don't want you to misrepresent what town council has said. You know, I think that your argument really...
Please stop the clock.
No. I want you to tell the truth when you're speaking about what people are saying to you, and you're not. So please, make your arguments germane to what we're dealing with here, which is whether or not we're going to approve something to comply with an existing law that takes effect February 2nd. Go ahead.
Okay, well, essentially, I lost 30 seconds here. So anyway, this state ADU bylaw allows absentee landlords. And that's whose benefits, not the private homeowners or family members or extended family. Individuals work to be able to afford and invest in a single-family home, which are purchased in single-family home neighborhoods and districts in good faith for better quality of life for themselves and children. Therefore, unless you want your neighborhoods to be destroyed, your property values to diminish, and your quality of life to disappear,
Thank you, Ms. Bowman.
then vote no. Thank you.
We knew where you were going with that.
Hi, Doreen Deschler, Precinct 9. I have a question. Why are we even here if we don't even know what the full statute of this is? Why are we voting on something that we don't have all of the information for?
Okay,
I'm asking a question.
No, you're asking two questions.
Okay.
So let's start with the first one. Why are we here? I can tell you why we're here. The legislature passed a law, and the regulations to implement that law have finally been approved. They're going to implement them next week. And unless we do something one way or the other, it's going to have an impact on how our town is viewed with respect to anybody who owns real estate and anyone who wishes to develop real estate or put a ADU on their property. So what Mr. LaValle has made very clear is what we're here to do is to comply with the basics of the regulation and exercise the limited discretion that we have to reduce what Ms. Bowman clearly indicates would be the damage to the community. And I'm not saying that I'm in favor or opposed to that. That's not my position. My position is, and what you need to understand is, we have an obligation to our citizens to decide whether or not we're going to approve what our planning board says is best for our town or not approve it, and then we're at the mercy of what the state has done. That's why we're here.
Okay. The second question is, if we don't have all the regulations and all the answers and everything that you just said that they changed things.
Right, no. The regulations have been passed as of last week. They go into effect next week. That's why we have so little, that's why we're here today.
I thought they just said that there was things that were changed that they didn't get to read yet and go over and vote on. Don't shake your head. They said they didn't get a chance to go over things, to read
Now,
them,
you're not,
and to vote on
now,
them.
Ms. Deschler, what they said was that they became, when they originally did this article, the final regulations had not been approved. They were relying upon what town council anticipated would happen, and town council was pretty close. There were only a couple of areas where town council's estimate was off. So in order to adjust to that, they made some amendments for today's meeting. But what was submitted to us before, if town council had been 100% exact, we wouldn't have any amendments. Everything has been passed as far as the state is concerned. We have to decide what we're going to do here, okay? I want to make sure you understand that.
All right. Why are we always jumping the gun? We jumped the gun on the MBTA, and now we're jumping the gun here. Why don't we wait for the law to tell us what we need to do?
Because as with the MBTA regulations, which is different than this, if the court had upheld it, we would have been in violation of the law at that time, okay? This is different. This is, we can accept what the state has laid out as their regulations, or we can tweak them in as much as we possibly can to make it reasonable and less painful for the Chelmsford citizens. That's what the difference is, okay? If, in fact, the court should vote those down, then we don't have to necessarily worry about ADU as we're dealing with it today and as they have implemented effective February 2nd. So February 2nd, unless somebody gets an injunction, there's going to be people are going to be doing things relying upon those regulations. That's where we're at. And I don't think it's fair for our citizens to rely on a possible injunction that could be of detriment to them.
And I don't think it's fair for our citizens to have people voting on something that we don't know what it is and have not had time to talk to our constituents about. We have not had time to go out and talk to the neighborhoods about this, to ask people what their thoughts are on it. We're supposed to be here voting for other people, not for us. We're not supposed to vote our conscience, our mind. We're supposed to be voting for the people that we represent. And we haven't had time to go talk to those people that we represent.
Well, this has been pending for several weeks. You certainly had time. This had been posted, what date?
Thursday.
No.
Thursday.
February 9th is when, February 9th is when this was
This is January.
January 9th. January 9th was when this was posted. And you had from January 9th to today, almost 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks. That was, this is why it's a special town meeting. And the fact is, we don't have any options other than either voting it up or voting it down.
Why are we here? We should not be
you can
voting.
vote it down.
We should
you
not
can
be
vote
voting.
it down.
We should not be voting.
Well, then vote the way you want to vote, okay?
Okay, I'm voting that we should adjourn. That's what I'm voting. I move that we adjourn. I motion that we adjourn.
Okay. So we have a motion to adjourn. We have a second. Now, can we put that on? You can do it.
I did it.
Okay.
What's the motion?
To adjourn.
You can amend. Well, you can't amend the motion. It's a motion to adjourn. No. If it's adjourned, it's adjourned. We can't adjourn. Do you want to have us adjourn till Thursday? Do you think that's enough time? No. So she wants to adjourn.
Adjournment is not debatable, Mr. Moderator.
I know it's not. So we're going to vote on it. And I'm asking if No. I'm asking if the computer is ready for people to vote on a motion to adjourn. That's all I'm asking. We're all set. Okay.
This is a waste of time being here. We should not be here.
The moderator is wrong. Yeah, the one that says 9208. Yeah, that's John.
It is certainly a chaotic situation in that so much is being asked of town meeting representatives with very little time, very little forewarning. And her point is a good one, that town meeting reps have not had a chance to consult their constituents on what ought to be
The
done.
motion to adjourn fails. 7 in favor, 110 opposed, 3 abstentions. Kindly introduce yourself by stating your name and address, sir.
My name is Farouk Kurani. I'm at El Dorado Road in Chelmsford. I had a couple of questions for the planning board, select board, and town council. Given that the state ADU regulations have now been finalized and that they're very clear on what the town can and cannot regulate, one of the things that the town can regulate is reasonable setbacks. My first question to the planning board and town council, and also given that the state regulations specifically state that they cannot be character of the neighborhood defined, why has the town, A, chosen to use the definition of no ADU in the front yard instead of setting up reasonable and defined setback and parameters instead of using a vague term like front yard, which does not appear in state law anymore? So that's question number one.
Okay, let's, Chris, do you have?
Yeah. So this was discussed at our public hearing for the planning board. And we are applying the dimensional standards. And one of the other things that's allowed is that we also apply reasonable restrictions that we already apply to single-family homes and their accessory buildings.
Can you please clarify, and I'd request maybe town council, you just said something, we're allowed to apply reasonable restrictions that you apply to other ADU, other accessory, and I'm asking you and town council, where in the law is that? Because having read the state regulations and the law,
Okay,
I do not see that, but I'd like to get clarification. Where is that exactly?
Well, Chris, if you know it, or town council, I don't care.
Again, you know, we are allowed to
No, you've asked your question.
I don't have it with me, but I'm assuming town council does.
You have it?
I do. So in response to your question, sir, this is 760 CMR 71.03, subparagraph B2. Any requirement concerning dimensional standards such as dimensional setbacks, lot coverage, open space, bulk and height, number of stories.
Sorry, could you speak up a little?
Hold on. Now, sir, you've asked a question. Let council respond.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is from the recently promulgated and approved regulations, 760 CMR 71.03, subparagraph B2. Any requirement concerning dimensional standards such as dimensional setbacks, lot coverage, open space, bulk height, number of stories that are more restrictive than is required for the principal dwelling or single-family residential dwelling or accessory structure in the zoning district in which the protected use ADU is located is an unreasonable regulation. So you cannot apply a different setback or dimensional requirement to the ADU than the underlying single-family dwelling.
Right, and you're actually making my point. My question is, instead of having a vague standard of not in the front yard, because there's nothing like a front yard anymore, because every single, what was zoned single-family is now zoned two-family, why has the town not set very specific dimensional setbacks for both ADUs and the primary residence instead of having a vague term like front yard?
So there is a front yard setback, sir.
And we have the definition in our bylaws for the front yard that we're referring to. That is defined in our bylaws.
Right, and what I'm saying is there is nothing like a front yard anymore because there's a...
Sir, are you making an argument now or are you asking a question?
What I'm asking is where in the state regulation
Well,
is front yard mentioned?
It's not, sir. It's in the zoning bylaw.
It has to do with the word setback.
It's a dimensional requirement, and to treat it, so the way that the bylaw in front of you tonight is drafted, it makes it consistent with the state regulations because it says that you can't treat the ADU dimensional requirements, including the front yard setback, differently than the underlying single-family dwelling.
Okay, so just to be clear, the town is saying that the principal residence with regard to an ADU versus a protected detached ADU is, the town is able to discriminate and allow a principal residence in front of the protected ADU, but the protected ADU is not allowed to be in front of the principal residence under that interpretation. Am I understanding correctly?
I'm not sure what you think is discriminatory about trying to be consistent with the state law, but I'm not sure I understand your question, sir.
I guess my question is, what you're saying is, you feel that the town is allowed to allow a principal residence to be in front of a protected ADU for a lot, but an ADU is not allowed to be in front of a principal residence, and that complies with state law? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
This is your last question, sir, so...
Yeah. So second question that I had was...
No, this isn't the second. This is the fourth.
Okay, the fourth question is, I understand that the town bylaw is not allowing any separate driveway for detached ADUs or curb cuts. Under what either dimensional or design standards is that allowed under state law to have a detached ADU be discriminated against to allow only the principal residence to have a driveway and not a detached protected ADU?
So in this case, we are applying the same standards that we have for the accessory buildings. You can't have a second driveway for accessory buildings, so you can't have one for an ADU.
Okay, so you're applying...
No. You've asked your 4 questions. Okay?
I'm just clarifying. I'm not...
No. He answered your question. I thought it was pretty clear. No? Did you? Are you confused with the answer?
I just want to be clear.
No, he's only got 4 questions, Mr.
He can go to debate, Mr. Moderator. He has 3 minutes for debate. He can ask any question he wants.
That's a moderator's call, sir.
It's my call, sir, and I've already indicated to you. And I appreciate your input because I would not have been aware that previously you were only limited to 2 questions, and I was letting people ask many more than that. So by doubling that, I thought that that was fair. Now, if you want to ask the same questions that he was planning on asking, I don't have a problem with it. No, debate is debate.
No,
I've limited...
You're not defining debate, sir. Stop it. You're debating now.
Mr. You're out of order, so cut it out.
Okay, I just want to clarify, and I'm not...
Point of order, Mr. Moderator. The man can go to debate. Please stop debating from the podium.
I'm not debating from the podium. I've made sure that his questions are answered. And if you want to debate and make your arguments, I'm fine with it, sir.
Okay, I'm done. I'm just clarifying that the town is attempting to apply dimensional and design standards meant for non-protected ADUs, accessory units, to protected ADUs. Is that correct?
I'll give you that question. Go ahead.
We are allowed by the state regulations to apply the same design and dimensional standards that we apply to the principal dwelling and its associated accessory buildings.
Okay.
I would respectfully disagree, but I understand where you're coming from. Again, I would urge the...
Are you debating now? You You're gonna, no, sir. You have the right to debate. If you want to say your mind, you've got 3 minutes. If you want to say, why you disagree, you have that right.
Now, again, my reading of the law...
Okay, so I'm going to give you the 3 minutes. I'm going to start it now, and you can start arguing your position. Okay?
Okay, yeah. So again, look, what I'm asking is, where in state law does it give the town the right to apply any standards from a non-protected accessory unit like a barn to a protected ADU? It just isn't there. The protected ADU statute and regulations are very clear, and having read them, there is no provision in there for a town to commingle dimensional and design standards for non-protected accessory units like a barn and a protected ADU. It's just not there.
So do you want to make a recommendation to the
Well, again,
the town meeting?
I'm not sure. It's my first town meeting, so forgive me.
No,
But-
you can say.
But
I recommend that you pass this or you don't.
I recommend that the town set very clear dimensional setback standards for front yard ADUs. Again, you don't want them to look ugly, but they are allowed to be set by state law within reasonable setbacks that can be no more restrictive than they are for a principal dwelling unit. So my recommendation would be A, to set those dimensional standards and not have a vague term like front yard, because there is nothing like a front yard anymore, because everything's a two-family now. And B, again, if there are dimensional design standards which apply to a principal dwelling unit, which means the principal dwelling unit is allowed to have its own driveway, therefore a detached ADU, by law,
You have 1 more minute, sir.
it has a right to have its own detached driveway. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Virginia Crocker Timmons, I'm Precinct 3. I'm also a member of the Select Board. Mr. Moderator, I'd like to just make a couple of clarifying comments regarding a previous speaker's questions about the general philosophy of board members. So if you consider that debate, you can start the clock.
Sure.
Just for this body, just as background for you, when the draft regulations came out from the state, I think it was earlier this year, the Select Board at that time wrote a formal letter to the state opposing those regulations for many of the reasons that are stated here tonight. At a later date, the Planning Board submitted a similar letter signed by all the Planning Board members, and there was a public input session or a public hearing on those draft regulations. I attended that hearing on behalf of the Select Board, and Mr. Chase was from the Finance Committee was also at that hearing. We spoke out against this. In fact, if you check some of the state publications and local publications, I was quoted as saying this would essentially obliterate single-family housing as we know it across the state. So philosophically, I think it's a little bit harsh to come down on the board members and the committee members for not supporting the philosophy of our quality of life and our residential homes and what we expected when we bought them. I cannot speak for, I think we heard the spirit of the boards tonight when the moderator polled for recommendations. Speaking for myself, I don't like where we are right now. And I think the state passed, the law is the law from the state's perspective, and I do feel that the right thing to do is for this town to have bylaws that comply with that state law. And I think we do know exactly what the law is. It's not that there are unknowns. It's coming out on February 2nd. And if we were to spend our time trying to take the state to court, to me that is completely irresponsible from a fiduciary standpoint. So your elected and appointed officials push back on this when there was the opportunity to push back on it. The city of Lowell was there. There were other municipalities pushing back, and we are where we are today. And I think that what's happening this evening is we're trying to respond to that to minimize local confusion and also to make sure that we are compliant with the state law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 9. Well done, thank you. Mr. Moderator, does this new law include multifamily, or is that just a Chelmsford thing? I see, it wasn't clear on your presentation if that's law or not. I thought it was just single family.
No, the text of the state law allows ADUs to be in place in any residential zone where single-family dwellings are allowed. And for Chelmsford, that includes multifamily zones as well. So a multifamily building could have an ADU attached or detached.
One?
By right, only one. And by our bylaws that we're proposing, it would be limited to one. If we did not pass this, the state bylaws would allow a second by special permit.
Okay. And how many housing units right now, we pass this tonight, and on February 2nd, everybody runs to the building inspector. By right, I can put one at my house, 900 square feet. Neighbors all can too, except the one that built one across the street. How many housing units in Chelmsford could essentially put a second unit in their backyard? What's the number?
But with the setbacks and such, we would estimate about 3,500.
3,500 of these things could go in on at each neighbor, every place, okay? And how many towns are meeting tonight or this week, so this February deadline? Are we the only one? I haven't seen anything in the news, nothing.
No, it varies. Some towns already have bylaws that meet these requirements. Other towns are not doing anything and are accepting the state bylaws. So it varies. Other towns are just tweaking their bylaws somewhat to comply, like we are. Other towns are really embracing this like they did with the MBTA and adding more permissivity than the state's even having in their bylaws.
Okay. And you talk about non-conforming structures. Somebody at one point said that we don't want to go to the ZBA with non-conforming because 85% of our properties are non-conforming in one fashion or form. It says that if non-conforming ADUs are not substantially more detrimental than the existing non-conforming structure in the neighborhood, it's allowed. So you could build one of these things in a marginal property? Is that correct?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Okay. That actually was your fourth question, Mr. Latina.
I'm a good counter, and I don't like censorship, Mr. Moderator, but I appreciate you keeping track of the numbers for me.
That's okay. I'm trying to be fair to everybody.
I appreciate that a lot. You can start the clock, Mr.
Sure.
Moderator. I lived in Southern California, Huntington Beach, as a matter of fact, before we moved to the Boston area. I don't know if you've all noticed the news, a lot of fires out there. I kind of looked at an overhead shot. Used to be every other house had a swimming pool in the backyard. Folks, they all have ADUs in the backyard in Southern California now, and you saw what happened. Those things burned to the ground. A lot of that stuff also meant that you used up a lot of water. We don't have a sewer capacity. You're adding 500 gallons per day. That's a lot of flushes, but if you take a couple of showers, that ADU is going to use an awful lot of water, flush it down the drain that we can't support in Lowell at the waste treatment plant. The state comes along and they come up with this great idea. I don't know if you've gone to the western part of the state. There's a lot of open land. There's a lot of nice little town areas. You could put all kinds of housing. No, they're coming to Chelmsford to spread the community like Los Angeles until we run out of space or it burns down, or today an earthquake. We had an earthquake, 3.4 hit us today. I don't know if you all noticed that. These things that we have, this infrastructure we have, cost a lot of money. If you add 3,500 more units to Chelmsford potentially, we can't afford to live here. You're paying $1 an hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right now on average in this town, to live in town, just property tax. Do your numbers. Look at your bill. Next year, you're going to add about $1,000 to your tax bill in Chelmsford to live here. If you add, let's call it half of that, 2,000 units or 1,000 units, that's 1,000 or 2,000 more kids. This is crazy stuff. And I don't know about you, I'm a citizen. The governor's not a sovereign. The town is supposed to run planning boards to do our zoning for us, not the sovereign that lives down in Boston. We don't kiss the ring of the king or the queen. This is what is happening. MBTA's one time, our select board did a brilliant letter and said, hey, we can't afford this. We can't even flush now. You guys can't get water here. Talk to LA if you think about water. This is nuts. And I don't know why we're doing it a couple days before and a couple days after the regulations come in. Nobody's digested this stuff. And the amendment we made was a state regulation. None of you have read that. You can't even read the number on there. I couldn't even read the et al. Stuff that was on that second amendment. We're not qualified for that. And we're changing our bylaw to match the state's bylaw when we already have one. They built an ADU across the street from my house, 15 Jesse Road. Go take a look at it. Blue dumpster, huge driveway, 4 cars, a party every weekend, swimming pool in the backyard, and a front door. And by the way, nobody asked this abutter about that property. It just happened, and that's current bylaws. You can do it. The neighbor down the street has an apartment, renting out to somebody that doesn't belong there. We should not vote on this. We should wait for the state to come up with the proper regulations and look and see what the rest of the communities are doing. Nuts. I'm voting no.
Thank you.
Glenn Diggs, Precinct 2. I have a couple of questions, and then I'll make a comment. Chris, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was well done. However, it seems to be there's some confusion about what's on the table, what's not on the table. And I think we need to clarify a little bit for everyone. First of all, would you agree that for the most part, the proposal that was submitted by the planning board is almost exactly what the state proposes, with some tweaks that the planning board has come up with? Namely, no curb cut, no unit in the front yard, and no second ADU on a 2-family. Those are the only 3 changes, aren't they?
I would somewhat disagree with you on that.
What else would there be? Because
I think
you made a statement.
Hold on. You asked a question. Let him answer it.
So the proposal from the planning board is not mirroring the state. The state's bylaw is extremely permissive and would allow a lot more than what we are allowing. What we did from the planning board perspective is we put in restrictions where the state would allow us, and then where the state is not allowing us, that's where we mirror the state. So if the state is saying you cannot restrict in this way, we're not restricting in that way. If the state is not saying we cannot restrict, we are restricting. So we're not mirroring the state's bylaw. If we wanted to do that, we wouldn't propose anything, and we would just allow the state's bylaw to take effect, which is a lot more restrictive, and in the planning board's perspective, a lot more detrimental to the town. What we're proposing is more restrictive than what the state will implement on February 2nd.
All right, you've used the term a lot more restrictive, several occasions. You know, other than perhaps Evan Belansky, who's been living with this for some months, you're probably the most knowledgeable person about it. I'd like to know exactly, and I think the people here have a right to know, what you refer to as a lot more restrictive. What things are more restrictive?
So one of the examples is that the state's bylaw will essentially allow short-term rentals. Our bylaw does not allow that.
The state does not allow short-term rentals in their proposal.
Yes, they allow it if the town does not restrict it. So short-term rentals by the state's bylaw will be allowed. If that's one area where we wanted to be more restrictive and more clear. Another area is in the setbacks. So the front yard setback.
I mentioned that one.
Yeah. You mentioned the curb cuts. There were a couple areas where we don't want the second ADU by special permit. So if the state law were to take effect and we didn't have the bylaw, property owners could propose a second protected ADU by special permit.
Where there is a two-family.
No.
All right.
Single family.
So those are the only changes.
Those are some of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
All right, but I don't think there are, well, that's for debate, I guess. All right, I'll go into debate.
Sure.
Can I ask a question of the town council in debate?
Sure.
If someone, let's say that we approve the changes as they are proposed, does an individual still have the right to go to the state to claim that they have been discriminated against because one of these four things that they may argue against is not in the spirit or not covered in the state rules, that the town has illegally caused them harm from going forward with their ADU? Does a person have the right to go to the state and argue that?
They would have to go to court.
I'm sorry?
They would have to go to court to argue that,
Right,
sir.
well, I mean by court, right. They would have the right to do that, correct?
Sure.
So they have recourse if they object to any of the four things that Mr. Valley has pointed to?
Yes.
Okay. So there's not a major difference between sitting by and doing nothing and allowing the state rules to take effect, or by approving what is before us. There are only four really minor changes to what the state has proposed, and we're making it a mountain out of a molehill in terms of that. Personally, I think that there is no argument to be made why you can't put in a driveway, because if you were building a single-family home, you'd be entitled to a driveway. If you would talk about putting it in front of your house, if you had a 5-acre lot and you decided to build your original house way in the back, there's no reason I can see why you wouldn't want to put the ADU in the front. There are many, many homes in Chelmsford where there's one house behind another. There are hammerhead lots, meaning that there's a small piece of land on the street and most of the land is behind another piece of land, and there's two houses there. So I don't think that one's fair. I do think that, you know, there should be a limit on how many ADUs can be on a lot. And I do think that the state has mandated that there cannot be short-term rentals. Now, you might get more clarification from Evan, who studied this more, or maybe you may know the answer to that.
Sir, does not prohibit short-term rentals unless they're prohibited in your bylaw.
Okay. So that's the only substantial one that's really different.
Well, I think you've asked that
I know the
before.
planning board has relied on town council a lot on crafting these four changes. And personally, I don't see there are any other changes in the whole state, in the city's version of it, other than these four things. So although I don't agree with the changes they made, I think there's recourse for someone to go forward and make a case to the state or courts that they are being discriminated against, and there's a path for them. So I'm going to vote for it. I urge others to vote for it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott Davidson, Precinct 3. I have a few questions. I think it's 3. One of them already got answered, so I'm saving some time. So
there you go. Thank you.
So the state of Massachusetts, on one of your slides, you said that there are 2 stated goals from the law being passed, one of them being to promote housing growth and to prohibit restrictive regulations. How does our bylaw support those goals?
So it follows the state guidelines in terms of not allowing certain prohibitions like we do now. The owner-occupied status and the other restrictions that we have on the LAAs. So that removes some of the restrictions. The other goal is that it will promote additional housing units.
Okay. In the course of the planning board's discussions in drafting this warrant article, did you discuss at all how our bylaw supports our master plan, the Town of Chelmsford master plan?
No. Our focus was on complying with the state law, and the approach, the additional piece of that approach was that if this bylaw is in place for a while and the town wants to change course and make it even more permissive or add additional units, if we want to in the future, we can always come back and make it, adjust it to the needs of the town. So our focus was not to align with the master plan at all. It was essentially just to comply with the new regulations.
Okay. And then you mentioned that if we don't pass this or take no action, it could be detrimental to default to the state bylaw. Could you provide like a couple of like specific examples of like if we didn't pass this and we had to default to the state bylaw, like what would be a couple of examples of things that could be detrimental to the town?
Two of them are ones I just spoke to the previous speaker about. Airbnb would be permitted in these ADUs, as well as properties could have multiple ADUs on their lots.
I'll just to follow up on that, that's why is Airbnb being allowed? Why is that detrimental?
It would be allowed because the state's law would allow it.
No, I understand it would be allowed, but why would it be detrimental? You just said having Airbnbs would be detrimental to the town. How would that be detrimental to the town?
It would be running a business in residential areas, and there are significant impacts to other bylaws that we have in the town. Again, if the town wants to take it a step further and allow those things in the future, after a significant and proper study, where there's a wider committee across town, the planning board would be open to those discussions in the future. But again, our focus at this stage right now was just to do the minimum to comply and then see how things shake out at the state level and the local level. And then if the town wants to do more later, we could.
Okay, thank you. You can start the clock. I'll be voting no on this. I have three primary reasons for voting no on this. First of all, I think the citizens of Chelmsford deserve to hear the select board, the finance committee, and the planning board debate the amended article in open session, and the citizens have not had a chance to hear that from any of those three boards. Second of all, this bylaw directly conflicts with a number of things in our master plan, including the desire for this town to be an age-friendly community. And then third, I actually agree with the proponent of the article. This needs to be discussed by a larger committee over a longer time with some serious thought and consideration rather than just having it jammed down our throats. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken Tassi, Precinct 2. I just have one question. If a two-family adds a unit, do they now have to have a dumpster for their trash and recycling?
No, I don't believe so.
How many dwellings do you have to get to before you have to initiate a dumpster or recycling privately?
Three. What's that? Yeah, dumpsters are not required. They're an option for a property owner.
So if you had a three-family currently, you add one more of these units, you have, now you don't have to require a dumpster, is that what you're saying?
I don't believe so.
Okay, just wanted to know.
Thank you.
Badru Pippin, Precinct 11. Mr. Moderator, through you either to the presenter or to Town Council. Based on tonight's words and phrases about protected to ADUs and auxiliary structures, otherwise, so to speak, are auxiliary structures defined in the Chelmsford bylaw and are therefore restricted in the defined front yard? Is that a correct?
If I understand your question, the answer is yes.
Okay.
So they are accessory dwellings, accessory buildings are defined in our bylaws, and the front yard is defined in the bylaw as well.
And are the accessory buildings defined to be housing, human housing class?
No.
Or they can be anything?
At this point, they are not defined. They're essentially defined as sheds or pool houses, things like that. But this ADU would be a separate definition. It wouldn't be an accessory building like those. It would be an ADU.
Okay. Third question, I think.
Yep, you got it.
Is it then correct in my interpretation or understanding that we are applying a auxiliary building, non-inhabitable by human beings, as being equivalent to a protected auxiliary dwelling unit suitable for humans?
No. So the ADUs have specific guidelines and restrictions and setbacks and dimensional requirements. What the state is saying is the dimensional requirements and design standards that you have for single-family dwellings and their associated accessory buildings are also applicable to these ADUs.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You missed out the clock. I think given the state's desire to facilitate housing growth and also remove any restrictive regulations on ADUs, which is additional dwelling units or auxiliary dwelling units, which I read it as housing stock, which is for humans, not for bonds and storages, and they are not dimensional structures. I think this particular zoning is restrictive and could be challenged in court. The second thing is, I do agree with the state's philosophy about wanting to increase housing stock. And I think we all have to figure out collectively how in Chelmsford we are going to raise the amount of housing available. It's not going to be, oh, we want to maintain the character and not be impinging upon our infrastructure. We have to figure out a long-term plan. That's going to be an important part of any activity that we're going to take. However, tonight, I think the planning board's intention, just like the MBTA, is to put a stopgap measure just to block from the car sliding behind or something, wherein somebody could, on February 3rd, file tens of ADU applications, possibly, thus negating what our intent is as well as we want it to be. Unless anybody here has a Supreme Court appellate court filing that is going to have an injunction and you are very good at it, you may also consider the Powerball lottery, but I suggest that we arrest it. I do think that the planning board has committed in some fashion and in others, and as has been called for, a wider committee to take public input and draft a slightly better or a much improved strategy document around what that zoning or bylaw is going to be over time. So, in short, even though I believe that some of these restrictions fly in the face of what residents want in terms of an increased tax base, a more efficient government, a focus on efficient usage of resources, a taxation on our infrastructural needs, and having to study that, I think this is just tonight putting a stopgap, hold the current position, make sure we are not in, we will not have probably, developers coming in overnight and on February 3rd and applying for ADUs, but just stopping it until we have time to study it. So with that notion and an implicit understanding that the town will do the right thing and the boards will do the right thing, and I have good faith in many of the people on the committees here, I would say vote yes, but hold them accountable with a citizen's petition if it doesn't happen in an amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Clancy, Precinct 2. I'd like to move the question.
Okay, we have a motion to move the question. Can we get that up on the screen?
Just to remind you, moving the question is a motion to end debate. And it looks like people are ready to end debate and to vote. I think some interesting points have been raised by the people who've come up to the microphone. This notion of equating a human-occupied dwelling with an accessory pool shed or something like that.
Motion passes, 110 in favor, 13 opposed, no abstention. Now we will vote on the warrant article with the friendly amendments.
And so it will fall to the planning board and other boards working with them to do a more comprehensive job with this ADU bylaw in the future. I don't think he said whether it required 2/3. It probably does because it's a zoning bylaw. It looks like it certainly got that, and it looks like we're about done for the night.
The article passes, 109 in favor, 11 opposed, no abstentions. I entertain a motion to adjourn. Second, all opposed? Any opposed? All in favor, all opposed? None? Thank you.
I don't know about you, but I found this a fascinating discussion about sort of the fabric of how the town decides what it wants to be. This is clearly a town with many, many single-family homes, 1-acre lots, all of that, and yet the overarching mandate now, because of the state law, is to allow these accessory dwelling units. And there are a lot of people in town, younger people, young families, who cannot afford to live in Chelmsford but would desperately like to because they grew up here or whatever that might be. This opens the door for them to at least have a place to call home that is Chelmsford, Massachusetts. There are all kinds of other things to consider in this. It was brought up that we have so little sewer capacity, for example, and that's been a big problem for at least a couple of years now and will continue to be. It's the impact on our schools and so forth. But if the planning board is to be commended for anything, it's to at least, as the last speaker pointed out, creating a stopgap measure that will allow us more time to craft the ADU bylaw that we want it to be. So with that, we close for the evening. I want to thank the staff and volunteers here at Chelmsford TeleMedia, and thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at the spring town meeting come April. I'm Kelly Beatty. Good night.